Last week, Will talked about how critical an attitude of gratitude is in maintaining our serenity. Gratitude takes effort and practice, and we must choose it. This week, we'll continue to talk about the importance of intentional effort, this time about how we choose to respond to circumstances and relationships that annoy, scare, and anger us. For anyone out there that's taking care of young children, has there ever been a time where that child was just so upset about some grievance, they threw a complete tantrum over something nonsensical? Their reaction to the situation is just completely over the top. Like they want to wear a leotard to run errands and it's 32 degrees outside. You say no, and they are immediately in uncontrollable tears and have a fit there on the floor. And you're just standing there, shaking your head. Sometimes I wonder if this is how God looks at me. I mean, years ago when I thought, if I hide my mom's cigarettes and lighters from her, would she stop smoking? Or those countless times where I sought the approval of others more than valuing myself or God. How about those times where I was mad or scared about one situation and I took it out on my closest loved one that had absolutely nothing to do with that? Does any of that sound familiar to you? You know that God was just waiting patiently and lovingly, shaking his head at me. This last year has been one big hot mess of worldly circumstances that could have shaken the foundation of even the most seasoned persons of recovery. So many of our regular tools or habits of recovery have been taken away, leaving us vulnerable to our triggers. As a codependent, my desire to have control and a clear plan has certainly blown up in my face. Is there a relationship or a situation that you have reacted poorly to? Have you been that toddler on the floor, metaphorically speaking, or maybe even literally speaking? Step 1 says we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, our fallible mental state, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is the part that we admit to ourselves that our own ability to think and respond is highly flawed. We need a higher power, a spiritual filter, if you will, to help us respond to the circumstances in our lives. And here's the thing, when you react, you're letting others or worldly circumstances control you. When you respond, you, with God's spiritual leadership, are in control. Change and circumstances that annoy, scare, and anger us are here to stay. Thankfully, God's victory over these circumstances is here to stay as well. Big Book, page 25, says, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best as we could, and the other, to accept spiritual help. The things we do that enable us to accept spiritual help are the principles contained in the 12 steps. If you've responded poorly in the past year, now is a great time to confess. Let it go and begin new habits, which will help you renew your sense of hope and joy. It's a great time to start intentionally practicing that 3-step method of identify, detach, decide. When faced with circumstances that annoy, scare, and anger you. Identify means you realize something's off. You've been triggered. Big emotions are lurking at the surface. Detached means you press pause. Maybe for a day or so, maybe it's just a few seconds. It can even mean physically removing yourself from the situation that's causing you to react poorly. It is okay to take this time. You need to. Decide is the discernment process. Here is where we allow and invite God into our decision making. This is our time to make a choice to respond one way or the other. Can you recognize that just for today, you don't have to have the ability on your own to manage life circumstances? Can you recognize that your way will lead toward a life that is overwhelming and unmanageable? Philippians 4:7 says, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Join me in admitting that we are powerless over our addiction and that our lives have become unmanageable. In taking that first step together, we allow room for God to guard our hearts and minds so that we can make our way back toward a peace that surpasses all understanding. We love you, we miss you, and we're beyond excited to be back together in fellowship with one another. Please visit the United Recovery page for more information and updates.